and let's share some screens with you guys. All right, so we are looking at, hold on. There you go. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Okay. So we are looking at Parshat Shlach. And it may seem strange that I have a bunch of tzitzit here at the top of the page. But while Shlach begins with the story of the spies, it actually ends with the third paragraph of the Shema. So we're going to take a look at the paragraph, and we're going to understand a little bit more about really what tzitzit and techelet are all about. Before we jump in, I do want to dedicate our learning to two people. First is in the memory of Rabbi Micah Kaplan, one of my colleagues who died unexpectedly this past weekend, and his funeral was today. Aaron, who's a regular participant in our Torah Tuesdays, is a member of Or Tzion in Scottsdale, where Micah was the rabbi. So I'm sure that's where Aaron is right now, not joining us for this. And a number of my colleagues, including Rabbi Aviva, have very close relationship with him. So I want to first of all dedicate our learning to his memory. And second, I learned today that one of my close friends from childhood, his 4-year-old daughter, who's actually just 1 month younger than my daughter, is in a coma in the hospital, and she's been there for the last month or so. That she was a freak accident, and they're hoping that everything will come around, but I'm just learning about this today, so I want to dedicate our learning also to the health and well-being and speedy recovery of Liviana Bat Leah, and may our heart's desires, our heart's prayers be answered. Liviana, right? Heart's answer. So with that, we're going to jump into our learning on Parshat Shlach. So the mitzvah of tzitzit. So we're going to start right here from oh, actually Aaron is here. Wow, wonderful. We'll just wait a second while he joins us here. Aaron, I don't know if you heard, I don't know if you were on Facebook, but we just dedicated our learning today to the memory of Rabbi Micah, as well as to one of my friend's daughters who's in need of some healing. So, but I'm glad that you're with us today, and I hope you're able to, you and your community are getting some comfort in the terrible, tragic loss of your Rav. So we are looking at the third paragraph of the Amidah, coming from the end of this week's Parsha. So I'll just jump in and read it to you. Adonai said to Moses as following: Speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make for themselves fringes on the corners of their garments throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner. That shall be your fringe. Look at it and recall all the commandments of Adonai and observe them, so that you do not follow your heart and eyes in your lustful urge. Thus you shall be reminded to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God. I, Adonai, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I, Adonai, am your God. Right? So we're all familiar with this language, right? We say this in theory twice a day. Some maybe we just say it once or twice a week, but we're all pretty familiar with this. In fact, this is probably one of the selections of text that is most ingrained in our minds from being young children. But this idea of right, and we know what we do, we kiss our tzitzit, right? And so we're going to learn a bit more of what's going on here. Okay, so we have a number of commentaries we want to take a look at. Actually, before we go anywhere, any questions at all? Just if you want to raise your hand, any questions at all about, give me 1 second, let me just admit Carol to the session. Yeah, Phil, what is your question?
The idea of not following your heart. I'm sure there must be some commentary on that, but I find that very reprehensible almost. I mean, I want to follow. If my heart's leading me in the right direction, I'm going to follow my heart. And there are other places in the Torah where it actually says, when you give to the temple, if you give from your heart, that's what we want. We don't want you to, not give from your heart. If you're not giving from your heart, don't give.
So
So here it seems a contradiction.
So we're gonna take a look at a commentary that looks at this question about what does it mean you're following your heart, and it's right. Your heart could lead you in the right direction, but your heart could also lead you astray. So you have to be able to look elsewhere to know if your heart is actually leading you in the right direction. But we'll look a little bit closer at some other texts that will help us understand that a bit better. So Carol, welcome. I was just telling everybody we're just the very beginning. We are looking at the third paragraph of the Shema. So. Okay, so let's take a look at so why fringes? So do not follow your heart. And this is a good answer to your question. It's so the verb has the same, velo taturu acharei levavchem, right? Taturu means like don't be led astray, right? And the word taturu is the same root as the word matur, right? And they return from searching, mitur, they return from searching the land. This connects us to the very beginning of the Parsha when we had the idea of the spies who were going out to take a look at the land. Right? And so, mitur haaretz, they came back from spying out the land. So therefore, right, translation therefore is, and ye shall not search after your own heart. Right? The heart and the eyes are spies of the body. They act as its agents for sinning. The eye sees, the heart covets, and the body commits the sin. So if we remember, right, the spies who go out, latur et haaretz, to scope out the land, right, they see the land and they are led astray. They actually lose faith in God. Right? So it's this idea of sometimes our eyes and our hearts can actually deceive us, which is why I said we need some other, true north to direct us, and that true north is going to be the Torah, right? So if our hearts, if our eyes lead us away from the true north as we understand it through the Torah, then right, that's problematic. But if our hearts and eyes are leading us towards the true north of doing Ritzon Adonai, God's will, right, then that's great. But we can't rely solely on the heart. But this idea of velo taturu, right? There's something about not just the heart, but it's also about the eyes, which is why it says uritem oto, and you shall see it, right? Velo taturu. And so this idea of seeing, which is why we have to have fringes. It has to actually be something that sticks out, that catches our eye, that we can see. There's a wonderful midrash, a wonderful Agadah, really, I should say, a story that appears in the Talmud right around where we're going to be looking at some other Talmudic selections in a little bit from Tractate Menachot. There's a story of a rabbi who hears about this fantastic prostitute in a far-off land, very expensive. And he's been to every other prostitute in the land. And he travels far to be able to find her, pays a huge sum of money, 400 shekels, right, to be able to see her. And he's climbing up to her bed, and when he goes up, he gets hit in the face by his tzitzit. And the tzitzit there's this reminder of, maybe he shouldn't actually be doing what he's doing. He's being led after his heart and not necessarily led after, not being directed towards the will of God. So there's a lot here about this heart and eyes. Yeah, Phil.
So how would you compare that with the section in the Torah that talks about if you want to give to the construction of the temple, you only give if your heart tells you to give? How do you think it fits the paradigm?
They're two completely different ideas, and even if we were to say that they were similar ideas, right, one is more about our heart is leading us towards something, and the other is about we are generous, and the idea of nedivat lev is just it's just a phrase meaning somebody is generous. But even still, one could make the argument that your heart was leading you to do, to donate, to be able to build something for God, to be able to realize God's vision. So again, that is, your heart is leading you in the right direction versus elsewhere where your heart would be leading you in the wrong direction. Okay, let's continue to see why else fringes and why here on the corners. Al kanfei v'dehem, right? We say on the corners of our garments, but it also really means on the wings of our garments, right? And so Rashi here is saying this is an allusion to God having delivered the Israelites from Egypt, as it states, right? And I bore you, ve'esa etchem al kanfei nisharim, and I bore you on eagle's wings. Right? I hate how tzitzit are transliterated here. This reminds me of, side note, driving through cross country once years ago, and I'm in Kansas. I pop into a not a Whole Foods, a McDonald's, to just use a bathroom and get a Coke. And the guy behind the register looks at me and says, "I like your zizit." I said, "You know what these are?" He's like, "Oh yeah, I go to this Messianic church over in Denver." I'm like, "Well, maybe you'll like the fact that these are actually from Israel." He's like, "Oh, that's cool." But he calls them zizit. And I was like, who would ever call them zizit? And clearly the person who transliterated this text here chose to transliterate that way as well. But the tzitzit are to be placed on a garment having 4 corners, but not on one that has 3 or on one that has 5. Thereby alluding to the 4 different terms used by God in describing the deliverance from Egypt, right? And there we have, right? V'hotzeti, v'hitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lekachti, right? I brought you forth, I brought you out, I will deliver you, I will redeem you, I will take you out, right? So this is 4 different ideas. This is also why we have 4 cups of wine at the Seder. And the number 4 is a very big deal when it comes to Pesach. And so this idea of 4 corners or 4 knafim, these wings, are to be really reminding us of God's deliverance, right? And getting that deeper appreciation for God whenever we see our tzitzit. Okay. Any questions on this symbolism and anything here? Okay. So we're going to keep going here. So why blue? So here we're getting into some Talmud, some wonderful Talmudic stories that help us understand this. And after we read this, I'll tell you a little additional information about this. Okay, so it is taught in a Breita. A Breita is a Tanaitic source. A Tanaitic source would be rabbis who wrote somewhere between, from the time of, let's say, Hillel until the year 200 of the Common Era, until the time of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. So those are the early rabbis, and those are the rabbis who make up the writing in the Mishnah. After the Tanaim of the Mishnah, we then have the Amoraim, and they are the later rabbis that would be cited in the Talmud. So whenever we have a Breita is going to be a source that is attributed to the rabbis of that Mishnaic period. However, it's a source that did not make it into the Mishnah. Right? So it's still pretty authoritative, but it's not quite as authoritative as if they were citing a Mishnah from elsewhere. Right? But a Breita is still pretty important. So it's taught in a Breita that Rebbe Meir would say, what is different about Techelet from all other types of color, such that it was chosen for the mitzvah of ritual fringes? It is because Techelet is similar in color to the sea, and the sea is similar to the sky, and the sky is similar to the throne of glory, right? Kisei shel kavod, the throne of glory of God. And as it is said, and they saw the God of Israel, and there was under God's feet like the paved work of sapphire stone, and the like of the very heaven for clearness, indicating that the sky is like a sapphire brickwork. And it is written, the likeness of a throne as the appearance of a sapphire stone. So here we have 2 different citations. This one first from Exodus, where we have a bunch of the elders who are gathered after Moses receives the 10 Commandments, and they look up, and there they can see the underside of God, whether it's the underside of God's foot or maybe underside of God's garment. But it's like, 1 second, Carol, it's like sapphire brickwork. And then Ezekiel tells us when describing the chariot, This throne, looks like a sapphire stone. It's this shade of blue. And so all these shades of blue are really important. Okay, Carol, you had a question. You've got to unmute yourself there.
Comment. Many years ago, I had studied a meditation with Swami Muktananda, and he always spoke of the blue pearl. And that would be something when you were in meditation, if you were really deeply in meditation and you saw that, it kind of indicated that that was a representation of the divine. And he taught that for many years. And there were times that I experienced that. I don't know if I was just very suggestive or it was something that I saw, but it was beautiful. It was kind of like you look at a full moon and then and it's very white, but then there's kind of a soft aura that comes out from it. So I don't know if there's anything to their blue with this blue, but it was an interesting thought.
Well, I'm sure we're all looking at nature, right? From slightly different perspectives, so it makes sense. I will say it's actually very nice, Carol, that both you and Aaron are sitting outside for this right now, right? So that we're able to, see the sky that's reminding us of. Interestingly, Carol, your blue is actually a little bit lighter in shade than Aaron's blue, but we both have a really, this beautiful, shade of blue. I'm gonna scroll down for a second so you can see this image. Right, so most don't really realize it. I talk about this every now and then, but if you see the blue, right, the blue of the flag is pretty darn similar to the blue of the sky in this picture, very similar shade. And then right, the blue down below and the blue up above, this is representative of the sea, and this is representative of the sky. Right? And it is supposed to be the color of Techelet. Right? They use indigo originally because we lost what Techelet actually looked like for a couple thousand years. But that is the idea here, that the Israeli flag is representing God below and above in this Techelet. It's this really beautiful imagery that I think is very often lost. People don't realize the deep symbolism of the Israeli flag. So here we go. We're going to go back to the source here. We're looking at Baba Metzia. So again, this is just a different tractate in the Talmud. So Rava says, why do I need the mention of the Exodus from Egypt that the Merciful One wrote in the context of the halachot, the prohibition against interest? This is somewhere else. And the mention of the Exodus from Egypt with regard to the mitzvah to wear ritual fringes, tzitzit. And the mention of the Exodus from Egypt in the context of the prohibition concerning weights. So there are three different places where God's telling us, you can't charge somebody interest, you can't charge your fellow interest, don't use deceit in measuring weight, and also God also reminds us of bringing us out of Egypt when we were learning about the tzitzit. So why do we have these three things? Rava explains, the Holy One, blessed be God, said, I am God who distinguished in Egypt between the drop of seed that became a firstborn and the drop of seed that did not become a firstborn. And I killed only the firstborn. I am also God who is destined to exact punishment from one who attributes ownership of his money to a Gentile and thereby lends it to a Jew with interest, even if he is successful, blah, blah, blah. And we're going down here, right? I am also God who is destined to exact punishment from one who hangs ritual fringes dyed with indigo dye on his garment and says it is dyed with Techelet. Right? The allusion to God's ability to distinguish between two apparently similar entities is why the Exodus is mentioned in all these contexts. So what this is saying is, right, who can distinguish between a sperm that will become a firstborn and a sperm that will not be? Right? God is the only one who could actually distinguish between all that. Who is the one who can distinguish between a coin that is used for good and a coin that has been used for bad? Right? All coins, when they're all mixed up, look the same. God is the only one who would be able to tell you which coin was used for wrong. And who can distinguish between indigo and Techelet? Supposedly because they look so darn similar, God is the only one who can distinguish between them. Okay, so this is really interesting. I'm going to stand up. Got my Techelet here. Actually, I'll hold it even closer. So the Techelet is very similar to the shade of blue that, my jeans, for instance, are made from. If I can actually bend my leg enough, because of the, no, the camera's too high. I can't get my leg up that high. But either way, it's a very similar shade of blue. And it turns out there's a man originally from Los Angeles who now lived in Israel probably the last 20 years or so, a man named Baruch Sturman. And Baruch started a company called Patil Techelet. You can go to techelet.com, Tekhelet. Again, I have no interest in this business, but it's a fascinating business. But Baruch Sturman did a bunch of research, and they found that they figured out a way to recreate Techelet based on a lot of various sources and taking a lot of archaeological findings into consideration. And I'm completely sold on his argument on what is legitimate Techelet. But what's interesting is they looked at the molecular structure of the Techelet that they've figured out how to make. And it is the blue molecules. It has a mixture of both blue and a little bit of purple. The purple was also used for dye. So when you say that something is, purple being a royal color, because it was very expensive to be able to make this. Imagine having a garment that was entirely Techelet or purple. But to be able to make Techelet, you take the purple dye, and you have to do a little bit of tweaking to it, and it turns into this beautiful blue. But the blue molecules in Techelet are the exact same molecule that you get from an indigo plant. So even though one is very affordable and readily available, indigo, and the other is expensive and very difficult to get, Techelet, the molecule is actually the exact same thing, right? The exact same shade of blue. And so if you're talking about in an ancient world before we have microscopes and real advanced science, yes, God would be the only being who could distinguish between indigo and Techelet. And even today, the only way you can really distinguish if something is dyed with Techelet or with indigo, you would have to actually see the tiny little traces of purple molecules to know that it was actually Techelet. Because you could never get it 100% perfectly all blue from the snail. It's really fascinating. Okay, any questions or anything here before we can keep going? Yeah, Phil.
I think I've answered my own question, but it just seems there was a lot of stuff before we got to the blue, and why was that all important for us to know leading up to this differentiation between the two blues, like the interest, like the weights, like the we can't lend with interest. I mean, why was that all necessary?
The reason it's necessary is so there's something called a oh my gosh. Gezerah Shava is the word. Gezerah Shava is when you have, you understand the meaning of something based on its context elsewhere. And so we see this all the time, like how to understand what certain words mean. It's usually used for like just understanding the definition of a word, how to translate a word, but it can also be applied to understanding the greater kind of meaning of a concept. So here, when we have this idea of God reminding us, Ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim, I am God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Why is that language used in these three places? To tell us that there must be something that is common between those three things. And each of those three places, we can see that there are ways to kind of be able to cheat in a way that nobody would actually know that you were cheating other than God. And so it's this idea of holding us up to this a level of moral behavior. And even if there's nobody who could ever catch us and call us out on our wrongdoing, God would be able to. And just as God was able to free us from slavery, right, then too God could also punish us. These are three places that help us understand that kind of connection. So it's through this idea of a Gezerah Shava. I could just look at the last text on its own. You'll say, how would we come to that understanding just from the text itself? And so you need those two other cases to get a better understanding. Yeah, Carol?
I'm thinking of people who maybe earn their living in not the most kosher of ways, but then they make big donations to nonprofits, and the nonprofits take the kind of the dark money. But then, so that it's God then who would know whether it was kosher money or it wasn't, although the nonprofits benefit from it and the person donating it comes off as a big macher.
Yeah, it's a little bit, right? It's what's a little different is there at least we know what people gave, right? And if you get a gift from from somebody who made their money crooked, in a crooked manner, it's very easy to say, okay, so we're going to return that $10 million. Now, what makes it more challenging though is somebody may have a lot of straight ethical businesses, and they may have some other businesses on the side which are corrupt. And how do you know what money they are donating? Like, what is the source of the money they're donating? Right? So if you have somebody who owns a bunch of restaurants, but then also launders some money through the restaurants, well, the restaurants do make some money ethically, right, and legally. So if they're making a donation, who's to say that the $10,000 they donate didn't come from the legitimate source of income, versus coming from the corrupt source of income? And that God would be the only one who could really tell you, other than maybe the donor and the donor's accountant. but it would be very difficult to tell. And that puts us in a much more much murkier water when it comes to understanding, can you accept such donations? Which is why most organizations just say they would refuse to accept any donations from somebody who is involved in corrupt business. And if they learn afterwards, they would work to be able to return that donation if the money still is available to return. Okay, let's keep going here and see what else we have. So we looked at the source of Techelet. So where does the Techelet come from? The sages taught this chilazon, which is the source of the sky blue dye used in tzitzit, in Techelet, has the following characteristics. Its body resembles the sea. Its form resembles that of a fish. It emerges once in 70 years, and with its blood one dyes wool, sky blue, for ritual fringes. It is scarce, and therefore is expensive. So what does chilazon actually look like? I don't think I have the book over here anymore. Chilazon, it's a murex snail. So if you've ever seen a murex snail, if you know what it looks like, it's just a small little, crustacean, little snail in a shell, almost like a hermit crab shell in a way. So everybody's trying to understand, what does this really mean that its body resembles the sea? Its body, being the shell, represents the rocks and stones and other shells that one would find on the floor of the sea. If you're going diving looking for a murex, it's actually very difficult to distinguish what is the murex snail or the chilazon from other rocks or snails on the ground. Its form resembles that of a fish, that even though it has this outer shell, it actually has a body which is, just like any other little crustacean, so like a fish. And it emerges once in 70 years. So the idea here is that they burrow down into the seabed, or they are further out to sea and they only come up every so often. This isn't entirely true, so I don't really know where this idea comes from, but it may be that certain times they're actually much more numerous than other times. I don't know. And it's technically not its blood, but there's a gland on the side of the snail that if you take that gland off, you don't need anything else, just that gland. You dry up and grind up that gland. That will produce a powder which you can then use for making the techelet, for making the dye. So what's interesting, and going back to this guy, Baruch Sturman, about, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a huge cache of shells that were found in this archaeological sites near the Mediterranean, in Israel, and all these shells were all cracked the same place on the side. So they found this, and the shell was that of a murex snail, a snail that is widely consumed around the Mediterranean. So they found some murex snails, and they cracked it open on the side to see what was there, and they found this little gland thing, and they took it out, and they were able to figure out, yes, we can actually make things purple with the dry gland here. But it makes it purple, it doesn't make it blue. What they realized then was that if they actually make this mixture, this dye, and they leave it sitting out in the sun for 24 hours, up to 3 days, then when you go to dye wool in it, it no longer dyes purple, instead it dyes blue. So once it's been dyed, so if you dye it if you leave it purple and do it right away and you dye it, the wool is purple, it remains purple. But if you leave the purple dye in the sun before you add the blue, then before you add the wool, then it will actually dye blue and not purple. So it's really fascinating. And if you want, for $40 at techelet.com, you can actually get a techelet dyeing kit where you can do the whole little thing, and you have all these little packets, and you can mix it up and you can do it yourself. Or if you ever are in Israel during either Chol HaMoed Pesach or Chol HaMoed Sukkot, they have marine tours in Zichron Yaakov where you go snorkeling for the Chila zone, and you can go to, and then they have like a whole little science thing where you can actually do the dyeing of the wool yourself. It's really a lot of fun. And it was probably like 100 or 200 shekels per person to do that. So it was really a lot of fun. Okay. So that's where it comes from. That's this idea of the blue. So then we have everyone being obligated. This is actually fascinating because really, for the most part, we've always said that only men wear a talit and only men will wear tzitzit. And until probably the last few decades, that was the case. And even still, there are plenty of women who don't wear a talit because it's not what women do. So let's see the source of that. So the sages taught in a Breita. Again, a Breita would be a source attributed to the Mishnaic rabbis, but just was not included in the Mishnah. So the sages taught in a Breita. Everyone is obligated in the mitzvah of tzitzit, including priests, Levites, Israelites, converts, women, and even slaves, non-Jewish slaves. Rabbi Shimon deems that women are exempt because the mitzvah of ritual fringes is a positive time-bound mitzvah, and women are exempt from every positive time-bound mitzvah. Positive time-bound mitzvah would be something that you are supposed to do, as opposed to something you're supposed to refrain from doing. That's what makes it positive. You should do it, and not refrain from. And time-bound means you do it at a certain time. So, for instance, saying the Shema. We say the Shema when we get up and when we go to bed. Those are positive mitzvot. We're supposed to do something, and we do them at a specific time. So women are exempt from doing those things. Exempt means that you're not punished if you don't do it, but it doesn't mean that you're not allowed to do it. It just means that they're not obligated to do it. And the reason why women are exempt from positive time-bound mitzvahs is because traditionally, women didn't necessarily have control over their time because they were looking after children. And you may have children who are, need to be fed and cared for in the morning, and you might want to be able to daven and say Shema, but you can't do it because these kids keep tugging on you, where the father might be able to just distance himself and do what he needs to do. So that's why women were originally exempt from positive time-bound mitzvot. However, the question is putting on a talit and putting on tzitzit, is that actually a time-bound mitzvah? Like, we put them on before we say the Shema so that we can say the Shema, but is it really time-bound? So Rav Yehuda would affix white and sky blue and techelet strings to the garment of his wife, and every morning he would recite the blessing to wrap ourselves in garments with ritual fringes. The idea here is that every morning he would do this. Right? And so the rabbis are saying, well, because that's done every morning, that's time-bound. And Rav Yehuda would say, no. It's because you get dressed in the morning, right? It's not that it's time bound. It's the idea is whenever you get dressed, and you're not going to take this off throughout the day, you put it on in the morning and you leave it on. If I were to sleep in and get dressed at noon, the first thing I would do would be putting on tzitzit, right? It's not that it's, time bound in the way that other things are time bound. It's just the first thing you do in the morning. Tzitzit are bound not to time, but they are bound to the garment. Certain garments require tzitzit, not necessarily time. So that's why they said that women were actually required to wear tzitzit. And there's stories of other rabbis throughout history, who would take their wives' aprons or other square garments and affix tzitzit to them. So the idea of people saying women should absolutely not wear tzitzit is it's hogwash, because clearly we have here that that women should. So it's nice to have a bit of a feminist take from the Mishnaic period, 2,000 years old. We have rabbis telling us that it's women should be wearing tzitzit. Any questions or comments before we continue from here? Okay. Alrighty. So we're gonna keep going here. This is a long one. This is kind of like a bonus text here. I love Rabbeinu Bachia, and this is going to be, I'll just read it. But he's just describing for us how one actually should tie and affix tzitzit. And then from this, we'll go back up to the top of the page, and you'll see all the different interpretations of what he's describing here. So the word tzitzit alludes to the 4 cords or threads which are to be attached to each corner of the garment and which are suspended from it. Right? We find Ezekiel speaks of a vision in which he was taken hold of by an angel, b'tzitzit roshi, by the lock of my head, or the fringe of hair. So this idea that hair sticking out, that would be a tzitzit, and so when you have the corner of your garment, some little things hanging out, those would be tzitzit. Right. So the words, they shall make for themselves cords, vasu lahem tzitzit, means they must not use threads which are already part of the garment, right? And make fringes out of those threads. They have to have some separate fringe to be able to add to it. Maimonides, in Hilchot Tzitzit, in the Laws of Tzitzit, explains the procedure and appearance of making and attaching the fringes. One takes 4 cords, introduces them into a small hole, right, near each of the corners of the garment, and bends them double in the middle so that 8 cords appear to hang down from that hole. The hole has to be no further than 3 fingers' breadth from the edge of the garment. The place where the fringes are attached must be at least far enough from the edge of the garment to enable a knot to be made there, the size and thickness of a thumb. If subsequently, through wear and tear, the width is reduced so the fringes appear literally at the edge of the garments, this does not disqualify them from performing their function. The same holds true if the angles of the garment, the corners, shrink. Initially, the length of the threads used to make the fringes should not be shorter than 4 finger widths with the thumb. If subsequently enough length remains exposed so that one can construct a loop, this is sufficient. So, what is this talking about? So, I've got my garment. There is a hole, and that hole should be 3 finger breadths from the corner. And I put 3 fingers down, and sure enough, 3 fingers gets me right to that hole. And it should be both ways, right? So it should be in a little bit. But if this hole were to start to stretch and stretch and stretch, because it wasn't, reinforced with additional thread, that's okay if all of a sudden the threads are closer to the corner of the garment. But they have to start out here. Not only that, but it says they have to be 4 hand breadths. So thumb to pinky has to be that long. And so if I measured out, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? It's actually a little bit more than 4 here. Okay. It says, what happens if one of the threads were to shorten? So here I have one of my tzitzit. It got caught actually in a vacuum cleaner and snapped. But it's actually long enough to still make a loop, and therefore it's permissible. And that is still a kosher tzitzit. Right? So if one of the 4 threads of the 4 tzitziot is totally torn off, However, this renders the garment to which it was attached unfit to wear. So if there wasn't any tzitzit there at all, right, this little guy here, if this little guy just was completely gone, and then this would no longer be a kosher tzitzit, and the entire talit would not be a kosher talit. I would have to replace this corner, right? So, but which is one of the reasons why every morning when I put on my talit, first thing I do is I inspect all the tzitzit to make sure that everything is kosher. In the process of attaching the fringes to the respective corner of the garment to which it is being attached, the wearer takes some of the 4 cords and winds some around the others so that approximately 1/3 of its total length will be so wound. So here you take one of those 4 threads, or one of the 8 really, and you wrap it around the others so that about 1/3 is wrapped. Right? About 1/3 of this is wrapped. Okay. This wound part is known as the gedil. So this harder part up here is the gedil. Right? The remaining 2/3 of the fringes are left to dangle by themselves unwound. The part wound around the other threads by 1 thread 3 times is known as a chulia. So if I hold this closely, you can maybe be able to see. Maybe not. Kind of. But there are, if I move my head away, maybe it'll, there you go. So there are actually 3 little threads per wrap. So each of those 3 threads, that 3 little wraps, that's referred to as a chulia. A chulia is vertebra, and there should be no fewer than 7 such vertebra, right, around this area. When winding more than 7, right, one should not exceed the number 13. So if you were to actually count how many I have here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So I have 13 chuliot on my tzitzit. The whole procedure symbolizes the 7 layers of the heavens, which are separated by 6 layers of space between them. Seeing that the color blue of one thread resembles the color of the sea, and the sea in turn resembles, therefore, the color of the sky, and what this symbolizes. The idea behind all this is to be remembered favorably in heaven. I think I missed one source. I hope I didn't accidentally delete it. Oh no, I accidentally deleted it. There should, let me make sure it's not here at the end. Oh no, that's horrible. Okay, so there's one additional source that was actually describing the symbolism of all this. So it says the word tzitzit, the gematria of the word tzitzit, tzadi yud, tav. The gematria, the numeric value, is 600, right? So 600, and yeah. So, and tzadi is 90, yud is 10, right? And tav is 400. So then you have 600, and then you have additional symbols, right? So here we have, you could say you have 13 wraps, 13 chuliot. So 600 plus 13 gets you to 613 to remind you of the commandments, and that's why we have this, right? Another understanding, though, is what if you don't tie it like Rambam? What if you tie it, say, like most Ashkenazi Jews? This idea here, we have 7 wraps, and then 8 wraps, and then 11 wraps, and then 13. So you have, if you look at the number of knots, you have 1 knot, 2 knots, 3 knots, 4 knots, and 5 knots. So you have 600 for the word tzitzit. You have 8 threads and 5 knots. 8 plus 5 is 13, get you to 613. But we can go even further here. Let's say Rambam's 13. You have 13 chuliot, and there are 3 wraps each place. 13 times 3 is going to be 39, right? Let's look elsewhere, where we have the traditional Ashkenazi wrapping. 7 plus 8 is 15, plus 11, 26, plus 13, 39. So the idea is you always want to have 39 wraps going on the tzitzit. Why 39? 39 is the gematria of Adonai Echad. God is one. Yud He Vav He is 26. Echad, Aleph Chet Daled is 13. So 26 plus 13 is 39. So there's all this symbolism that comes from the tzitzit. It's actually, wow, I mean, this is definitely one of the most kind of mystical, Kabbalistic practices that actually appears in the Torah, and not from these like crazy, big stretch, midrashic reads. Like this is, all this stuff is right here. There's all this symbolism of why we want to have the tzitzit, to try to remind us of God, to remind us of mitzvot, to remind us of being freed and the obligations that come with that gift of freedom, to remind us that everybody is equal in God's eye. It doesn't matter if you are a man, woman, if you are a child, if you are a slave, if you are born Jewish by birth or if you are Jewish by choice. Everybody is equal and equally obligated to have this symbolism. So tzitzit is really this powerful idea, and to have something you can actually see, to be reminded of this on a daily basis, is really quite powerful. Yes, Phil.
Do you have your own personal story or one that you know of where this has actually made a real difference, other than the one you told us about the prostitute when the tzitzit hit him in the face? But do you have any stories that relate to this, that of how this actually was really helpful in remembering God's commandments?
Sure. So when I first decided to go to rabbinical school is when I first took on the mitzvah of wearing tzitzit daily on a talit katan, like a small talit underneath my shirts. But where a lot of Orthodox men these days will wear it, but then they just tuck the tzitzit in, and they either have them tucked in their pants, or they have it come out of their waistband, but then they just tuck it right into their pocket, so they don't really see it. That never made sense to me, because the whole point is you should be able to see it. And so I embarked on this journey where I wore my tzitzit out, and I could see them, and to be reminded of ways to behave. And if I was maybe sitting around having drinks with some friends and somebody starts chatting about somebody else, all of a sudden I then happen to look down, I see my tzitzit, and there's this reminder: what are you doing? Stop having this conversation. Right? So initially I found that tzitzit were very beneficial for kind of a daily reminder and kind of guiding my behavior. However, after about maybe 5 years of wearing maybe 4 years of wearing the tzitzit, I found at some point they actually stopped. I became so kind of immune to them that they were just always there, and I kind of took them for granted, and they didn't necessarily stop me from doing certain things. At that point, I then decided to stop wearing tzitzit, because I felt more than anything I was actually insulting them, like to put them on, but yet then I would ignore them. There's a concept of somebody who's called a naval birshut Torah, a scoundrel in the realm of Torah, somebody who appears very pious, but then does these very immoral things on the side. Not that I felt like I was doing anything immoral, but I just felt like here I'm going through this effort of putting on talit katan and having the tzitzit out there and presenting myself in such a way, and yet I'm not even really looking at them. They're not doing anything more than anything. It was just posturing, and I realized at that point I needed to stop wearing them. So I still have my talit katan in my drawer. It's right next to my socks and underwear, and I actually have a couple different talit katan, but I preferred having the techelet on them as well. Techelet is about between $40 and $50 for a set of techelet. It's actually less than it used to be. When I first got techelet, I think it was about $80 when I got them. But so I don't have a whole bunch of sets of tzitzit, talitot ketanot. But if people just have like plain white tzitzit, then they have a whole bunch of them. But so I still have a couple of mine sitting in my drawer that if I ever feel I need them, I'm ready for them again, then they're there, ready to be put back on. Any other questions, thoughts, comments about the history of this? Yeah. Aaron, you can unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. Sorry if the wind might pick up here. I'm up in northern Arizona. The first Tully Katan that I purchased was at a camp that Rav Gabe and I were at through BBYO. We went and visited an Orthodox Jewish camp in I guess it was maybe on the New York side. I don't remember. Up near Starlight. Do you remember that whole thing?
Oh.
Yeah, at Kala we went to this Orthodox Jewish camp, and all of the Orthodox boys wore their kippot like way up front. We played basketball against them, but they didn't take off their Tully Katan, and they had a little store. So I bought 2 sets as well, and I ended up wearing them for about 6 months during a period where I was doing my best to keep kosher and everything like that. And yeah, it's a physical reminder, right? So it's this kind of the same thing as a kippah, but the kippah is not. There's no commandment in the Torah or anything to wear a kippah. There's this commandment to wear fringes on the corners of your garment. So I definitely did that through I think that would have been the junior year of high school.
Yeah. That's wild. I didn't do Kala, right? So we did LTC, but I didn't do Kala.
Okay, so I missed. So all right, I thought you were there.
No, Cohen. I actually called Mike Cohen earlier today. They're moving today, but obviously he was at Kala with you.
Yeah.
But even the colors of Zion AZA number 1948.
Yeah.
That blue and white to represent the same colors that we have here.
I have never seen that there's this many variations. I'm so used to. I'll tell you, you get so Ashkenazic focused on everything, whether it's food to ritual or anything, and the fact that here there's this sort of like plethora of options here that are all very beautiful in their own way is really interesting to me. It's very cool.
So it's actually interesting, though. I mean, talking about that. So you can tell which ones are Ashkenazi in origin and which ones are not, right? So here, Radziner, so the Arizal, so this is Rabbi Isaac Luria, the Kabbalist, who was from Ashkenaz, but then kind of married those customs with Sephardi customs, and he came up with Nusach Sfarad, which is actually what Chabad use. They follow a lot of the Ari customs. But you can see that there's definitely an origin in Ashkenazi, the way that this is tied, right? The 5 knots and the wraps between it. Ravad is also Ashkenaz. Sefer Chinuch, this is Ashkenaz. The Gra, the Vilna Gaon, Vilna, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, right? It is, I probably should tie it according to the Gra, since I am a descendant, but, whatever. And then we have, 7, 8, 11, 13. This is just standard Ashkenazi, and, Shachter as well. But then you have Rav Amram Gaon. Rav Amram Gaon is the first person who created a Sidur. And he's a Gaon, which means he's going to be from Babylonia. So this is about 1,000 years old from Babylonia. And so he's just doing these kind of straight wraps. This is actually how my first Talit Katan, that's how I tied my first Talit Katan. And then when you look at, Ben Ish Chai is actually from Iraq. And so about, 150 years ago, Iraq. So, but about 150 years ago or so. So that would be, you can see that there's definitely this Middle Eastern influence, the way it has those individual wraps, even though he also has those knots in between. And then Rambam, we know Rambam is not Ashkenazi at all. And actually Yemenites follow the teaching of Rambam. Now, is it that Yemenites do it because Rambam does it, or Yemenite practice was there before and Rambam learned from them as well? It's unclear. The reason why I tie mine according to Rambam is because Yemenite Jewish community broke off a long time before the rest of the Jewish world. And so a lot of their practices are, kind of are older and locked in time. And so my thinking is that this may actually be one of the oldest interpretations and oldest ways of tying tzitzit. Besides the fact, I think it's also really good looking. So that's why I follow the Rambam approach. But Carol, you had your hand up before as well. You wanted to say something.
Yeah, I hadn't realized there were so many different styles of knotting, and I had crocheted some talit way before you came, and Judy helped me tie the tzitzit. I think we did the 7, 8, 11, 13 progression, and putting the tzitzit on really made the talit come alive. I mean, it was beautiful, and I loved it beforehand, but it was like giving breath to the tzitz, to the talit. It was really a cool experience.
It's a very fun activity, and it's a really meaningful activity, like you said. So like this talit was a custom order talit, but really it was just a giant piece of raw silk, that was finished along the edges and had an atara, collar attached to it. But it didn't have tzitzit. So I bought the techelet, and I was able to sit there and tie them on. And it's great because if you go to techelet.com, they actually have videos and like pictures illustrating how to tie the tzitzit. And when you sit there and you say, L'shem mitzvat tzitzit, right, for the sake of the mitzvah of tzitzit, before you do it, and you sit there and you really work hard, and maybe you mess up, and then you undo it, and you do it again, and by the time you get to the fourth corner, like you're really flying, and it's like, okay, bring me another garment so I can tie some more tzitzit. Of course, then you don't have any more to do. But it makes it this really special connection. A good friend of mine, actually Stephanie Abadan, who teaches yoga at Mishkan, when her daughter Navi became bat mitzvah, they got her a talit, and we bought her the tzitzit, and then she came over and she sat in my office, and I tied the tzitzit for her while she was sitting there in my office. We kind of learned about them and went through the whole process. And it makes it much more yours, right? Not just grabbing something off the rack. It's this really cool process. It's not difficult to do. Some of them are much easier to tie than others. The Rambam, I find, is actually very tricky to tie, especially the first chulia and the 13th chulia, because it's a little bit more involved. But I think it makes it this really cool, it's a really cool project and processing. It gives you that connection. And it's nice to see that a lot of, at the Ramah summer camps, oftentimes they have kids, making their own talit and then tying their own tzitzit. It'd be nice if they were doing with techelet as well, but again, at $50 a set for techelet, probably not going to give that away to kids. Yeah, Phil, you have a question? Yeah, unmute yourself.
My first comment is, what a great bar bat mitzvah project, which you sort of alluded to when a child is to do this. My second one being the chairperson of adult education, I was thinking this might be a really fun thing to do, even on Zoom, if we were to have a whole, maybe, I don't know, a couple of weeks or whatever long it takes for us to do that for ourselves. For those that are interested, it'd be a fascinating class. And the third thing is Judaism 101, the difference between when you have the talit on we call it a katan, as opposed to having it on your talit. Is there any differences whatsoever? And are there a set of rules for the daily wearing of it all the time in the katan, as opposed to the talit that we only wear on Shabbat, Shabbat mornings, and only in the, so I'm just wondering, is there a whole different set of rules, or is it the same, or how,
Yeah, so they are. Well, first, a few things. One, adult education, to be able to do this, you have to be in person to be able to do it, to help people like with the hand motions and whatnot. It's pretty tricky to do without actually being there. But it is a great project to be able to do. And actually, there's one other thing, Aaron, you were saying before about the idea of a kippah. Well, the two other things that are mentioned in the Shema that serve the same purpose of the tzitzit are mezuzah and tefillin. And the idea of both of those is that you're supposed to be reminded of God. Mezuzah, you don't take it with you, right? It's just there in your home. But every time you walk past that through a doorway, you see it, you should be reminded. So similar to the idea of the tzitzit. And you think about people who just, every time they see a mezuzah, they just touch it and kiss it, but they don't actually really look and think about it. It would be a similar kind of thing of what I was going through with wearing the talit katan. And tefillin, most people, there are some very small groups of people, most people do not wear the tefillin all day long. You put them on in the morning, and if you're lucky, maybe you have the impressions on your arm for another hour of the day, maybe. So, that doesn't really stay with you through the whole day. The tzitzit is the one way that you can ensure that that reminder is with you at all times. Which brings me to Phil's point about, is there a difference between a talit katan and a regular talit? As far as the tzitzit are concerned, there's no difference. Now, you may not want to have the thicker threads on a talit katan because you're wearing it underneath your garment, so they make thin and thick threads. So to do the Rambam threads, where it's kind of hard to see, but it's actually really fascinating. So there's only one thread of blue, even though there are 8 threads here. How do they do that? The thread of blue is dyed only halfway. So here it's blue, and here it's white. And so they do that. They only dye half the thread, so that you can put it through the holes, and you only have one thread of blue when you then wrap it around. But this idea, like you have a thinner set of threads. The thin sets of threads cost about $40, and the thick set costs $50. Right? So you could have a thick set of threads, but if you're going to be wearing them in your trousers, you probably don't want to have anything too bulky and too long hanging down. Right? So you'll do the thinner ones. But it doesn't really make a difference. Even on a talit that people wear, at shul, if you go to the talit rack we have here, some of the talitot will have thicker, bigger tzitzit, and some will have smaller. It doesn't really make a difference. It's just personal preference. That being said, there's nothing truly special or holy about tzitzit. So you go to most synagogues will have a little coat rack outside of the bathrooms, and the idea that people can take off their talit and hang their talit there. That's not because it's forbidden to take a talit into the bathroom. It's because it's a nuisance to go to the bathroom and maybe have tzitzit hanging down and flapping around and all that. But if you're wearing a talit katan and it's underneath your garment, you're not going to take it off when you need to go to the bathroom, right? You just bunch up the tzitzit and you do whatever you need to do to keep them out of the way. And it's not inconvenient. Maybe it takes you 1 or 2 days to kind of figure out what's the best way to keep them, from interfering with your business in the bathroom. But there's nothing specifically special or holy about them to make them have to be treated differently. They just have to be kosher. But beyond that, right, so some rabbis say you can be buried in your tzitzit. Other rabbis say it's nice to cut them off. There's no obligation to cut them off. If you were to cut them off, it's kind of nice because then you could give them to like a tzitzit, like one of your 4 tzitzit could go to children, grandchildren, friends, as a nice gift. But there's nothing innately holy about the tzitzit. Yeah, Phil.
So, what is the rationale for wearing talis over a katan tzitzit? Well, if you have the katan on and you go to shul in the morning on Shabbat, why are you required to wear a talit in addition to that? Because you already have the fringes, the tzitzit, you're wearing them all the time. Why do you need the extra talit? And then, what determines the set of rules as to when we put on talit?
You're not obligated to wear 2 sets of tzitzit, right? If you have tzitzit on, you've got tzitzit on. Now, when you put on a talit katan, the blessing is al mitzvat tzitzit, for the mitzvah of tzitzit. When you put on a talit, the blessing is lehitatef batzitzit, to wrap yourself, to envelop yourself in tzitzit. So they're 2 different blessings. because there's kind of two different purposes for them. But the main reason why somebody may choose to then wear a larger talit over is because if you are davening, some people like to put the talit over their head and really give themselves that sense of privacy. It's also much easier to gather four corners from a talit that's hanging out rather than having to pull the tzitzit from underneath your garment and then try to lift them all the way up to be able to kiss them because they're hanging down underneath your shirt. Would not be very becoming to have your shirt lifting up and exposing your belly while sitting in shul just to say the Shema. The main reason we wear a talit in shul is for the sake of reciting the Shema, so that we can say this line, this paragraph, right? Uritem oto, right? And you will see it. Uzchartem et kol mitzvot Adonai, and remember all the mitzvahs of God. And you can't really say that, and you should see it if you aren't wearing one. So that's why people wear talitot. And when it used to be that everybody's garments were four-cornered garments, just large sheets that were wrapped in different ways, it made it really easy. You didn't have to have a special separate garment. But when we stopped wearing garments like that, either the options were either we just stop wearing tzitzit full stop, or we come up with some other garment that enables us to be able to continue the mitzvah of tzitzit. Hence, we have a prayer shawl. But prayer shawl is going to be a newer invention, much newer than tzitzit as an invention. So, but by the way, the patil techelet, mind you, it's a patil techelet. It's not patile. It's a thread of blue, which is why I actually don't follow a lot of these other interpretations as well, where there are two threads. You can see two threads of blue on multiple of these, which is why I really like the Rambam, patil techelet, a single thread of blue. Right? It says, uritem oto. Not you see them, not you see otam, all the different threads, but it says uritem oto, you see it. It is actually referring not to the tzitzit, but to the patil techelet. So you should see that patil, that single thread of blue, and because it's blue against white, it really jumps out at you. And that's what you're supposed to see to remind you of the mitzvot and to remind you of God and everything else. So is this an actual tzitzit? Is this the actual techelet? The way that Kohanim made them 2,000 years ago before they were all wiped out by the Romans? Possibly not. However, I think that Baruch Sternman has made such a good argument. I think that this probably is about as close as we ever would get to the original way they were made, if not the same way that they were made. And therefore, I feel because we are this close to having a connection to it, I would never go back to wearing talit without a patil techelet on there. However, if I am wrong, if we are wrong, and this is not actual techelet, then having this thread of blue is actually no different than just having threads of white. And in fact, you can have threads of any color you want. Preferably not indigo, because you want to actually be able to see which is which. But if you had a red garment, you could have red threads and then one blue thread, and that would be fine as well. But I think it's appropriate for us to go out of our way to be able to fulfill this mitzvah of techelet, so that we can be reminded of the sky, be reminded of the sea, be reminded of the sky, be reminded of the throne of glory, be reminded of God and God's mitzvot. So if you're thinking about maybe getting a new talit, or maybe your tzitzit are just looking a little ragged, I would encourage you to pick up a new set and try to get techelet. One thing I would definitely want to recommend, though, is where it says radzin, so radziner, you can see this blue is actually a little different than the others. This is like a deeper, almost metallic blue. I'm not sure if it's easy to tell with the share screen. Radziners actually use cuttlefish ink that is then treated with iron and other things to make it this blue. It's also not color fast. So it doesn't actually meet the tests that some of the rabbis lay out for us in the Talmud for what would be a color fast dye, whereas the patil techelet does actually meet the color fast tests. So when my first set that I did with the Amram Gaon style using Radziner techelet, like the tali katan was stained blue all the time because of the thread. It wasn't color fast. But I've never had any issue, and this techela has been dry cleaned every year before high holidays since 2012. So for 8 years, this has gone through dry cleaning, and the color is still nice and strong, and it hasn't bled to any of the rest of the garment. So, so I'm completely sold on techela. So, all right, I'm going to say goodbye to those of us who are on Facebook, and if any of you here want to continue,